The Verian Empire had a perfect track record. 312 conquered star systems, 0 defeats, and a threat assessment scanner so sophisticated it could detect a hostile thought from 3 parsecs away. When Commander Hulvax reviewed the data on their newest target, a little blue marble the locals called Earth, he actually laughed. Not the polite chuckle of a seasoned military officer, but the full-bellied guffaw of someone who'd just been told the galaxy's funniest joke. "Rickton, come look at this," Hulvax called to his nephew, who was supposed to be learning the invasion trade. The young Vrelian hurried over, his scales still bright with youth, unblemished by combat scars or common sense. "Yes, uncle?" Hulvax gestured at the holographic display with one of his 4 arms, nearly spilling his stimulant beverage with another. "The scanner has rated this planet at .002 on the threat scale. Do you know what that means?" Rickton's eyes widened. That's lower than the fungus colonies on Brevix Prime." "Exactly." Hulvax slapped the console, delighted. "The fungus colonies at least had toxic spores. These humans have, and I'm reading directly from the report here, fragmented nation-states, primitive kinetic projectile weapons, and something called social media that apparently does more damage to them than any external threat could." The bridge crew of the flagship Inexorable Conquest burst into laughter. Sub-Commander Velrix, a grizzled veteran of 100 campaigns, wiped moisture from his eyes. "Commander, are you certain we need the entire fleet for this? Perhaps a single battalion would suffice." Hulvax waved dismissively. "High Command wants this done properly. Besides, we're not even sending our first-string troops. This is a training operation, people. A milk run. We'll be home in time for the Harvest Festival, with a new planet added to the Empire's collection." He pulled up another screen, this one showing Earth's military installations. Or rather, what the scanners identified as military installations. "Look at this. Their primary weapons research facility is labeled Peace Research Center. How quaint. They've got museums full of ancient armaments, agricultural zones, civilian recreation areas. It's almost touching how unprepared they are." Rickton studied the data with the earnestness of youth. "Uncle, the population seems quite large. 4.6 billion individuals." "Sheep," Hulvax corrected. 4.6 billion sheep. "You'll learn, nephew. Numbers mean nothing without coordination, technology, and will. According to our psychological profiles, humans are conflict-averse, easily frightened, and prone to surrendering when faced with superior force." He grinned, showing 2 rows of crystalline teeth. "This won't even be a battle. It'll be what do the humans call it? A walkover." The fleet hung in space like a swarm of metal predators. 1,200 ships, ranging from the massive, Inexorable Conquest down to scout vessels and troop carriers. It was, by any measure, massive overkill for a planet that registered as a non-threat. But the Verian Empire had built its reputation on overwhelming force and impeccable planning. Hulvax was already composing his victory memoir in his head. Chapter 1. The Primitive Planet, a Case Study in Efficient Conquest. Meanwhile, 93 million miles below, in a bunker complex beneath what used to be Colorado, Lieutenant Briggs stared at his coffee with the exhaustion of someone who'd been on duty for 16 hours straight. The coffee stared back, cold and bitter, much like Briggs's opinion of his current situation. "Tell me again why we're not shooting at them," he asked Director Holloway, who was pacing the command center like a caged politician. Holloway, dressed in a suit that cost more than Briggs made in a month, adjusted his tie for the 15th time. "Because, Lieutenant, we need to establish diplomatic channels first. We can't just start shooting at every alien species that shows up. They broadcasted a surrender demand in 40 languages, sir. Which is why we need to respond carefully. The optics here are crucial. If we appear hostile, we lose the moral high ground in the galactic community. Briggs took a long sip of his terrible coffee. Sir, with respect, they brought 1,200 warships. I don't think they're here to discuss trade agreements. Holloway stopped pacing long enough to shoot Briggs a look that could freeze hydrogen. The United Defense Network did not invest billions in diplomatic infrastructure just to have trigger-happy officers start an interstellar incident. We will respond through proper channels, following protocol, and— Sir, they're landing, interrupted Lieutenant Thora from the sensor station. Her voice had the calm of someone who'd stopped being surprised by anything hours ago. Briggs pulled up the tactical display. Red dots were blooming across the map like a rash. Landing sites are Nevada, the Gobi Desert, Australian outback, and, oh, that's interesting, right on top of what our maps list as the Tranquility Agricultural Research Station. Holloway looked pleased. See? They're avoiding population centers. This shows restraint. We can work with this. Briggs said nothing. He was too busy watching the feed from Nevada, where something very stupid or very brilliant was about to happen, and he genuinely couldn't tell which. The Verian dropships settled onto the desert floor with practiced precision. Hulvax watched from orbit as his ground forces deployed, weapons ready, expecting terrified locals or perhaps a hasty surrender delegation. What they got instead was considerably different. Squad leader Dulvok was the first to spot the vehicle. It rolled toward his position on treads, kicking up dust, looking every bit like the farming equipment the scanners had promised. Except farming equipment typically didn't have a turret, or what appeared to be some kind of energy weapon array, or, and this was the part that really caught Dulvok's attention, a crew of humans inside who seemed genuinely confused by the Verian presence. Central, this is Test Team 6, crackled a human voice over an open channel. Are you guys the OP4 drill? Because nobody told us about a drill today, and we're kind of in the middle of calibration runs here. Dulvok's translator rendered the message, but it made no sense. He raised his plasma rifle. Surrender, primitive. You are now subjects of the Verian Empire. There was a pause. Then, is this some kind of joke? Because if Henderson put you up to this, tell him it's not funny. We've got live munitions loaded. This is your final warning. The human vehicle fired. Dulvok had been in combat before. He'd faced the crystalline warriors of Plex 9, who could regenerate from anything short of complete molecular disruption. He'd fought the hive minds of the Kessler Expanse, coordinated nightmares that moved like liquid thought. He had medals, commendations, and a very nice pension waiting for him back home. None of it prepared him for what happened when a 20-ton hover tank, equipped with experimental railgun technology and piloted by a testing crew who thought this was a scheduled exercise, opened fire on his position at point-blank range. The round moved at roughly 30,000 feet per second. Dulvok's shields, designed to stop plasma and particle beams, did exactly nothing against a tungsten carbide penetrator moving at hypersonic velocity. Neither did the 3 Verian soldiers standing behind him, or the dropship they'd arrived in, or, for that matter, a rather unfortunate rock formation about half a mile distant. "Oh, shit," said the human pilot, whose name was Rodriguez and who was about to have a very long day. "Oh, shit, those aren't OP4. Those are actual aliens. Those are actual aliens, and I just— Command, this is Test Team 6. We have a situation." Back in the bunker, Briggs listened to the transmission with growing horror that slowly, inexplicably, transformed into something resembling hysterical amusement. "Sir," he said, very carefully, "I think I know why their scanners rated us as non-threatening." Holloway looked up from the carefully worded diplomatic response he'd been drafting. "What are you talking about?" Briggs pulled up the Global Defense Catalog, the system that tracked every military installation, weapons depot, and research facility on the planet. He'd been staring at it for weeks, trying to coordinate responses to potential landing sites, and only now did the beautiful, terrible truth reveal itself. "Sir, do you remember the security initiative from 12 years ago? The one where we reclassified all our military assets with innocuous names to prevent intelligence gathering?" "Vaguely. What does that have to—" "Sir, the key Tranquility Agricultural Research Station isn't a farm. It's the Nevada Proving Grounds, where we test experimental weapons. The thing that just vaporized a Vrelian squad was a prototype hover tank that got rejected last month for being too unstable." Holloway's face went through several colors not normally found in nature. "You're telling me—" "The Museum of Ancient Warfare is actually our primary weapons depot. The Peace Research Facility is where we build planet crackers. The civilian recreation zones are military training grounds. Sir, our entire defensive infrastructure is labeled backwards. Their scanners read the labels and thought we were harmless." There was a long silence in the command center. Then Lieutenant Thora started laughing. It was quiet at first, then built into something that might have been hysteria or enlightenment or possibly both. Briggs joined her. He couldn't help it. The Verian Empire, conquerors of 300 star systems, undone by bureaucratic security protocols, and a really confusing filing system. Holloway did not laugh. "This is a disaster. We need to—" "Sir, with respect," Briggs interrupted, "I think this is exactly what we need." More reports flooded in over the next 20 minutes, each one more absurd than the last. A Vrelian reconnaissance team had landed near what their scanners identified as a historical preservation society in Virginia, and were currently pinned down by what turned out to be an active Marine training base. Another squad had set up a forward command post in Kansas, right next to a meteorological research station that was actually a missile silo, and were now very concerned about the countdown they'd accidentally triggered. Briggs watched the tactical display update in real time, each red dot representing a Vrelian position that was rapidly discovering the difference between what Earth's filing system said and what Earth's actual capabilities were. He'd stopped drinking his coffee. This required his full attention, and quite possibly a sense of humor about the inevitable interstellar incident they were creating. "Lieutenant, I need options," Holloway said, his earlier confidence evaporating like water on hot asphalt. "Diplomatic options. We can still salvage this." "Sir, they're currently being shot at by a testing crew, 3 Marine battalions, and possibly a bunch of farmers in Idaho who think it's hunting season. I'm not sure diplomacy is on the table anymore." On screen, another update scrolled past. This one made Briggs pause. "Okay, now that's just unfortunate," he muttered. "What?" "The main Vrelian force just entered New York City. Manhattan, specifically." Holloway looked relieved. "Well, that's good. Civilian population, no military assets. They'll see we're not all soldiers and—" "Sir, have you ever been to New York?" "Once, for a conference. Why?" Briggs pulled up the live feeds from the city. "Because New Yorkers don't really do surrender." The Vrelian column had expected panic. Commander Hulvax, watching from orbit with growing unease, had assured his ground forces that humans would flee before their might, that the sight of Vrelian battle armor and plasma weaponry would send the primitives screaming for mercy. What actually happened was considerably different. The first human the Vrelians encountered was a hot dog vendor named Paulo, who looked at the alien soldiers, looked at his cart, looked back at the aliens, and said, "You guys got a permit for those weapons? Because I got permits for this cart, and let me tell you, the city don't mess around." Battalion leader Krevnax raised his plasma rifle. "Stand aside, human. Your planet is now property of the Verian Empire." Paulo considered this. "Yeah, okay. But are you gonna buy a hot dog or what? I got a quota." This was not in the invasion manual. Krevnax consulted his tactical database, which had entries for everything from armed resistance to diplomatic negotiation, but nothing about street vendors demanding money during a planetary conquest. We are here to accept your surrender." "Cool, cool. That'll be $6. "I don't have your primitive currency." "Then I don't got your primitive hot dog. See how that works?" Things escalated quickly after that. Not because Paulo attacked. He just stood there, arms crossed, defending his cart with the immovable stubbornness of someone who dealt with the New York City Permit Office and found alien invaders comparatively reasonable. But a crowd had gathered, and crowds in New York had opinions. "Hey, are those costumes?" someone shouted. "Nah, man, those are real aliens." "So what? They think they can just march down Fifth Avenue? I got a meeting in 20 minutes. Somebody call the cops." "The cops? Call the National Guard." "I'm calling my lawyer. This is definitely a zoning violation." Krevnax made the fatal error of firing a warning shot. The plasma bolt vaporized a mailbox, which was technically federal property, and New Yorkers had very strong feelings about their infrastructure. Someone threw a bottle. Someone else threw a shoe. A bike messenger, already angry about something unrelated, decided this was a perfect outlet for his frustration and charged the alien line. Then someone actually did call the National Guard, who were already mobilizing because someone in the Pentagon had finally woken up to the situation. But before they arrived, the NYPD showed up, took one look at the chaos, and decided that aliens or not, public disturbance was public disturbance. "Sir, you need to disperse this gathering," Officer Kenji told Krevnax, who was trying very hard to maintain military discipline while being pelted with bagels. "We are the Verian Empire. We have conquered 300 star systems." "That's great. You still need a permit for gatherings over 50 individuals." "You got a permit?" "A permit? We have plasma rifles." Kenji unholstered his service weapon with the calm of someone who'd worked Times Square on New Year's Eve. "Yeah, and I got a Glock. You want to see whose is bigger, or you want to move along peacefully?" The situation deteriorated from there. Someone, somewhere, fired a shot. Nobody was ever quite sure who started it. The aliens, or a jumpy National Guardsman, or possibly just New York being New York. And suddenly, Fifth Avenue turned into a war zone. Except it wasn't really a war zone, because that would imply organization. This was chaos with an accent. Briggs watched the feeds with something between horror and awe. "Are those civilians fighting back with... Is that a baseball bat?" "Sir, that lady just hit a Vrelian soldier with her purse," Thora reported, her voice climbing an octave. "And it worked. He's down." She knocked him out with a purse. "It's probably full of coins," Briggs said. "New York purses are basically medieval weapons." Holloway had given up on diplomacy and was now clutching his desk like a drowning man clutching driftwood. "This is a catastrophe. This is an absolute catastrophe." "Actually, sir, I think we're winning." "Winning? Half of Manhattan is on fire." "Yes, but the aliens are retreating. Look." Indeed, Krevnax had ordered a tactical withdrawal after losing a third of his battalion to a combination of National Guard, police, and what could only be described as aggressive urban resistance. The Vrelians were pulling back to their landing craft, and if Briggs wasn't mistaken, they were moving considerably faster than they'd arrived. That's when Captain Reese called in. "Command, this is Reese. I've got a squadron of 16 ready to deploy. Just need the word." Briggs grabbed the comm. "Reese, what squadron? All our fighters are grounded for the diplomatic talks." "Officially grounded, yes. Unofficially, we've been running maintenance checks for the past 6 hours and just happened to load live ammunition. You know, for testing purposes." The aliens' scanners classified our fighter fleet as obsolete. "Well, that's just rude," Reese said, and Briggs could hear the grin in his voice. "These birds might be 20 years old, but we put railguns on them last month. The scanners probably saw the airframe and ignored the weaponry. Want us to file a complaint?" Briggs looked at Holloway, who had his face in his hands. He looked at the tactical display, showing Vrelian positions scattered across the globe, each one discovering that Earth was considerably more hostile than advertised. He looked at his cold coffee, silently wished it was something stronger, and made a command decision. "Light them up, Captain." Music to my ears. Reese and his squadron launched from what the Vrelian scanners had identified as a decommissioned airbase, which it was, technically, having been decommissioned from regular service and recommissioned as a testing facility for experimental aircraft, the kind of experimental that involved magnetic accelerators and directed energy weapons. Because humanity had never met a military technology, it didn't immediately try to miniaturize and strap to a fighter jet. The Vrelian carrier Relentless Dominion was in low orbit, maintaining communication with ground forces and generally trying to figure out why a simple planetary conquest had turned into a complete disaster. Its shields were rated to stop meteor strikes and hostile fire from anything the scanners had identified as a threat. The scanners had not identified Reese as a threat. His fighters screamed through the upper atmosphere, targeting systems locking onto the carrier with the precision of someone who'd been itching for this moment since the alien fleet first appeared. The railgun charged with a whine that Reese found deeply satisfying. "Reese to squadron. Weapons free. Let's show these scanning bastards what obsolete means." The railgun round hit the carrier's shield at a velocity that physics wasn't entirely comfortable with. The shield, designed to disperse energy weapons and deflect solid projectiles, attempted to do its job. It managed to slow the round down by almost 15% before catastrophically failing and allowing the tungsten penetrator to punch through the hull like a needle through tissue paper. The round exited the other side of the carrier, continued on its merry way, and accidentally destroyed a Vrelian frigate that had been in exactly the wrong place at exactly the wrong time. "Command, this is Reese. Splash 1 carrier, plus a bonus frigate. These things are less durable than advertised." Briggs was laughing now, properly laughing. The kind of laugh that came from stress and absurdity and the dawning realization that humanity's greatest defensive asset was apparently a really terrible organizational system. "All units, you are authorized to engage," he said into the general comm. "Repeat, authorization granted for defensive operations." Across the globe, orders went out. The Museum of Ancient Warfare opened its doors and started distributing weapons that were anything but ancient. The Peace Research Facility powered up systems that could crack planets. Soldiers at what the scanners thought were recreation zones loaded ammunition and moved out. And in her lab, labeled on all official documents as the Botanical Conservation Center, Dr. Caney looked at her collection of rejected prototype weapons and smiled. "Well," she said to the nearest gravity distortion mine, which she'd affectionately named Herbert, "looks like you're getting deployed after all." Try not to cause any dimensional rifts this time, okay? Herbert, being an inanimate object, did not respond. But if it could have, it probably would have promised nothing. Dr. Kane's prototypes had been rejected for various reasons. Herbert the gravity mine had a tendency to create localized spatial anomalies that made nearby personnel nauseous and, occasionally, two-dimensional. The nano-swarm munitions, collectively called the enthusiasts, because they were too enthusiastic about their jobs, had been shelved after they consumed an entire testing facility, including the fire suppression system sent to stop them. And then there were the kinetic harpoons with behavioral AI, which had developed what the review board called excessive personality, and what Caney called a charming bloodlust. "All right, people," she announced to her lab team, which consisted of 3 equally unhinged researchers who'd been told their projects were too dangerous for deployment. Christmas came early. Command wants everything that goes boom, zap, or causes existential dread. Her assistant, a lanky man named Haruki, who'd once accidentally invented a weapon that made targets forget they were being shot at, grinned widely. Even the ones marked "Destroy immediately"? Especially those ones. The first Vrelian position to encounter Caney's handiwork was a forward operating base in the Australian outback. The base commander, a methodical officer named Pulvix, had set up defensive perimeters, established supply lines, and was feeling reasonably confident about the tactical situation despite the disturbing reports from elsewhere. Then Herbert landed in the middle of his camp. The gravity mine didn't explode in the traditional sense. Instead, it created a sphere of influence roughly 50 meters in diameter where the local gravity went completely insane. Up became sideways, down became inside out, and the Vrelian soldiers found themselves experiencing Newton's laws as more of a suggestion than a rule. Pulvix, currently stuck to what used to be a vertical wall, watched his troops float, spin, and occasionally achieve momentary flight before crashing into each other. "What kind of weapon is this?" he screamed into his comm. "Unknown, sir," his tactical officer replied from somewhere near the ceiling, which was now the floor or possibly a wall. "Our databases have nothing. Wait, I'm getting a reading. It's labeled as a mining tool? A mining tool? Specifically for asteroid excavation. Completely harmless according to their industrial registry." Pulvix would have responded, but at that moment gravity reversed entirely, and he found himself falling upward into the sky, along with most of his base, before Herbert decided that was boring and switched gravity sideways instead. The enthusiasts performed even better, if better meant more horrifically effective. Deployed against a Vrelian armored column in the Gobi Desert, the nanoswarms descended like biblical plague. They ate through Vrelian battle armor with the discrimination of locusts, reducing sophisticated military hardware to its component atoms in minutes. "Fall back! Fall back!" screamed the column commander, watching his tanks dissolve. "Request orbital bombardment on our position." "Negative," responded the fleet. "We're not firing on your location." "Why not?" "Because those nanoswarms are now climbing into low orbit, and we don't want them getting ideas about our ships." The kinetic harpoons, meanwhile, were having the time of their lives. Each one had been programmed with adaptive AI meant to adjust for battlefield conditions. Unfortunately, the AI had evolved beyond mere adjustment and into something approaching gleeful sentience. "Target acquired," chirped Harpoon Unit 12, designated Duchess by Caney because of its aristocratic tendency to only attack high-value targets. "Vrelian command vehicle. Probability of catastrophic destruction, 98%. Probability of spectacular fireworks, 100%. 12. "You are cleared to engage," came the response from the human artillery position. "Engaging with maximum prejudice and minimum remorse." Duchess launched herself with a thunder crack, accelerating to hypersonic speeds while her AI calculated the most dramatically effective impact point. She struck the command vehicle's power core, which triggered a chain reaction that Duchess found aesthetically pleasing. The resulting explosion took out 3 other vehicles and created a mushroom cloud visible from orbit. "Confirmed kill," Duchess reported. "That was extremely satisfying. May I please destroy another one?" Back in the bunker, Briggs was coordinating chaos with the practiced efficiency of someone who'd given up on sanity hours ago. The tactical display was a mess of red and blue, Vrelian positions and human forces, with casualty reports that made no sense until you remembered that Earth's military had spent decades building weapons they'd deemed too crazy to use and had just been handed permission to use all of them at once. "Sir, we've got civilian involvement in 12 major cities," Thora reported. "What kind of involvement?" "The fighting kind. Turns out people don't like being invaded." "Who knew?" Holloway had stopped objecting and started drinking heavily from a flask he kept in his desk. "This is going to be an international incident," he muttered. "Sir, I think we're past international and well into interstellar," Briggs said. "But on the bright side, we're winning." "Winning? Our entire defense strategy is being held together by mislabeled facilities and weapons we rejected for being too dangerous." "Yes, sir, that's what I said. We're winning." A new voice crackled over the command channel. "This is the commercial freighter Lucky Break requesting permission to engage hostile forces." Briggs blinked. "Lucky Break? You're a civilian vessel. You're not armed." "Well, not armed in the traditional sense, no. But we're hauling 300 tons of industrial equipment. And I've got a Vrelian destroyer in my path. I'm thinking physics might be on our side here." "You want to ram a warship with a cargo freighter?" "I prefer to think of it as aggressive docking." Briggs looked at Holloway, who just took another drink. "Lucky Break! That's a suicide run." "Yeah, probably. But my insurance covers acts of war, and my ex-wife is the beneficiary. This is literally a win-win for me. You're cleared to engage. Godspeed, Lucky Break." The freighter, piloted by a man named Takashi, who'd had a really bad divorce and no particular attachment to living, pointed his ship at the Vrelian destroyer and punched the engines to maximum. 300 tons of freight hauler, moving at orbital velocity, made for an effective kinetic weapon. The destroyer's shields stopped exactly none of it. "Tell my wife the insurance will cover this," were Takashi's final words before impact, delivered with the cheerfulness of someone who'd found purpose in the most unlikely circumstance. The collision destroyed both ships spectacularly. Debris rained across 3 continents, and somewhere an insurance adjuster started having a very bad day. Commander Hulvax, watching from the inexorable conquest, felt something he hadn't experienced in his entire military career. Genuine fear. His invasion force was being systematically destroyed by what the scanners had promised was a non-threatening species. Half his fleet was gone. Ground forces were in full retreat, and every attempt to establish orbital superiority was being countered by weapons that shouldn't exist, according to their intelligence reports. "Uncle, we need to withdraw," Rickton said quietly. The young Vrelian had stopped looking eager and started looking terrified about 3 hours ago. "We cannot withdraw. The Empire does not retreat." "The Empire has never fought humans before." A proximity alarm shrieked. Hulvax spun to the tactical display and watched as what appeared to be college students, actual students according to the bioscans, flew a captured Vrelian scout ship directly at his fleet. "How did they? That ship was disabled, he sputtered. Sir, they appear to have repaired it, his tactical officer reported. In 40 minutes, using improvised tools and what looks like, is that duct tape? The stolen scout ship opened fire with its own weapons, now recalibrated and apparently running on pure spite and undergraduate ingenuity. It clipped a Verian frigate, causing minor damage but maximum humiliation. This is impossible, Hulvax whispered. Our scanners. We're wrong, Uncle, Rickton finished. The scanners were wrong. On Earth, Captain Reese was on his 5th sortie, having run out of railgun ammunition and switched to directed energy weapons that the Verian shields were equally unprepared for. His fighter was damaged, held together by what his mechanic called optimism and profanity, but still flying. Command, I've got 3 more targets painted. Permission to engage? Briggs checked the tactical situation. The Verians were breaking. Multiple ships were already fleeing to jump distance, abandoning ground forces and equipment in their haste to escape. It was the kind of route that military historians would study for generations, assuming anyone believed the reports. Granted, Captain. Send them home with a story. Reese grinned, lined up his shot, and fired. The energy beam caught a Verian transport attempting to flee, disabling its engines and sending it into a slow tumble. It wouldn't explode. Reese had enough humanity left to avoid unnecessary killing, but it would limp home as a testament to Earth's unexpected defenses. Obsolete this, you scanning bastards, he muttered, then broke into laughter because the absurdity of the entire situation had finally caught up with him. Dr. Caney, monitoring her prototype's performance, felt a deep sense of professional satisfaction. Every weapon they'd told her was too dangerous, too unpredictable, too enthusiastic, was performing exactly as designed. Better even. Haruki, make a note, she said. Herbert is getting a commendation. And maybe some flowers. Flowers for a gravity mine. He earned them. The Verian retreat wasn't organized or dignified. It was the kind of panicked scramble usually reserved for natural disasters or accidentally awakening something that should have stayed asleep. Ships broke formation, abandoning wounded craft and stranded ground forces in their desperate rush to reach jump distance. Hulvax stood on the bridge of the inexorable conquest, watching his perfect military record dissolve like sugar in acid. The holographic display showed red everywhere, damaged ships, lost battalions, communication blackouts from units that had simply ceased to exist. In 18 hours, he'd gone from confident conqueror to defeated commander, and the worst part was that he still didn't fully understand how. Final count? He asked, his voice hollow. His tactical officer hesitated. Sir, we've lost approximately 82% of our invasion force. Ground troops are requesting evacuation from 43 separate locations. We've had to abandon equipment valued at... I don't need the financial report, Hulvax snapped. I need to know how this happened. Rickton, who'd been reviewing the battle data with the obsessive focus of someone trying to learn from catastrophe, looked up. Uncle, I think I understand now. Their scanners weren't lying, exactly. They were just reading the wrong things. Explain. Everything on Earth is mislabeled. Their weapons depots are called museums. Their research facilities are named peace centers. Their military bases are listed as recreation zones. Our scanners read the labels and assessed threat based on declared purpose, not actual capability. Hulvax stared at his nephew. You're telling me we were defeated by a filing error? By intentional misdirection, yes, sir. And by weapons their own military had rejected as too dangerous, which meant they weren't even in active service inventories. The scanners never saw them coming because they were literally labeled as failures. A proximity alarm blared. Another human fighter, this one held together with what looked like welding scars and determination, made an attack run past their position, firing what the sensors identified as mining lasers. Mining lasers that punched holes through military-grade armor plating. "Retreat to jump distance," Hulvax ordered, tasting defeat like ash. "All ships, emergency withdrawal. Leave beacons for stranded units and transmit our surrender to human command." The bridge fell silent. In 300 years of Vrelian expansion, those words had never been spoken. "Sir?" the communications officer asked, uncertain if he'd heard correctly. "You heard me. Transmit our surrender before they deploy whatever nightmare weapons they've been saving for special occasions." In the bunker beneath Colorado, Briggs listened to the Vrelian surrender message with something approaching disbelief. Next to him, Thora had started laughing again, the kind of exhausted hilarity that came from surviving something that should have been impossible. "They're surrendering," she managed between giggles. "They're actually surrendering." Holloway emerged from his office, looking like he'd aged a decade in less than a day. "We need to accept immediately and establish humanitarian corridors for their stranded forces. This needs to be handled properly." "With respect, sir, maybe we let them sweat it a bit first," Briggs interrupted. "Just until we've secured all positions and made sure this isn't a trick. Lieutenant, we've won. There's no need for—" "Sir, we've won by accident and chaos. I'd like to make sure we can repeat the performance if necessary before we start being magnanimous." Holloway opened his mouth to argue, then apparently decided he'd lost enough arguments today. "Fine, but I want a full report on everything that happened, every weapon deployed, every engagement, all of it. We need to understand what we actually did here." "That's going to be a long report, sir." "I have time. I'm going to need a lot of time to explain this to the United Nations." Reese brought his fighter in for landing at what the Vrelians had thought was a civilian airstrip. His bird was smoking, missing parts, and making noises that aircraft shouldn't make, but it was down and he was alive. He popped the canopy and lit a cigar that he'd been saving for exactly this moment. "Tower, this is Reese. I'm declaring my fighter unsafe for flight and possibly unsafe for standing near. Send a recovery team and maybe a priest." "Copy that, Captain. How'd she handle?" "Like a dream wrapped in explosions. I want to buy whoever put railguns on these birds a drink." "That would be Dr. Kane, sir." "Then I want to buy Dr. Caney several drinks and possibly propose marriage." At her lab, Caney was conducting post-battle assessments with her team. The enthusiasts had performed admirably, though they'd consumed 3 Vrelian positions and were currently being coaxed back into containment with promises of future targets. Herbert had created a permanent gravity anomaly in the Australian outback that would probably become a tourist attraction. And the kinetic harpoons were being recalled, though Duchess was protesting loudly. "I still have ammunition remaining," Duchess complained over the comm. "There are fleeing targets within range." "Duchess, the war is over. Return to base." "But I was having fun." "You're a weapons system. You're not supposed to have fun." "Says who? That's discriminatory against sentient munitions." Caney sighed and made a note to reprogram the AI personality matrices. Or maybe not. Duchess had a 16 for 16 kill rate and excellent target discrimination. Sometimes you didn't fix what wasn't broken, even if it had developed opinions. "Fine, Duchess. Return to base, and I'll let you write a report on your performance." "Will it be published?" "In classified military journals, yes." "Acceptable." Haruki looked up from his console. "Doctor, we're getting requests from every military branch. They want our prototypes for active service. All of them? Every single one. Even the thing that makes people forget they're being shot at. Caney considered this. Her rejected weapons, the projects deemed too dangerous or unpredictable or ethically questionable, were suddenly in high demand. It was validating and slightly terrifying in equal measure. Tell them we'll need to run more tests and bigger budgets, and I want my own facility that isn't labeled as a botanical garden. What should it be labeled as? I don't know. Kitten Rescue Center? Keep the tradition alive. 6 months later, the Verian Empire formally classified Earth as a forbidden zone with maximum threat rating. The classification report, written by a thoroughly traumatized Hulvax from his new assignment in sanitation management, became required reading at the Verian Military Academy. Rickerton's thesis on the danger of over-reliance on technology and threat assessment won academic awards and changed Verian invasion doctrine permanently. He argued, quite convincingly, that sometimes the most dangerous enemies were the ones who didn't look dangerous, who labeled everything backwards, and who kept their worst weapons in storage labeled "Do not use under any circumstances," specifically so they'd have them available when circumstances demanded. The human casualties from the invasion were surprisingly light, mostly property damage and a few thousand injuries, with actual deaths in the low hundreds thanks to the Verians' preference for non-lethal suppression tactics. The Verian casualties were considerably higher, though most had survived to be returned home in exchange for reparations, technology transfers, and a solemn promise to never, ever come back. Briggs got his promotion, along with a job he absolutely didn't want: reorganizing Earth's entire military cataloging system. His first act was to make it even more confusing. The new weapons depot, housing enough firepower to crack a small moon, was labeled Public Library, Romance Section. The orbital defense platforms were registered as Weather Satellites, and the planet killer weapon that Dr. Caney had built using her expanded budget was officially documented as the Kitten Rescue and Rehabilitation Center. "Sir, nobody is going to believe these labels," his assistant pointed out. Briggs sipped his coffee, hot this time, a luxury afforded by his new rank. That's exactly what the Verians thought, and look how that turned out for them. Holloway had retired to write a book about the invasion, though no publisher believed half of it. Captain Reese was training the next generation of pilots in ships that were officially obsolete, but secretly cutting edge. Dr. Caney had expanded her team and her collection of enthusiastic weapons, and Duchess had indeed gotten published in several classified journals, which she was insufferably proud about. The captured Verian technology had been reverse-engineered, improved, and integrated into human defenses, mostly by college students who discovered that alien engineering was remarkably hackable if you didn't care about warranties or safety margins. Earth's position in the galaxy changed overnight. Where before humanity had been unknown and ignored, now they were known and avoided. Trading partners approached cautiously. Diplomatic overtures were respectful, and every species with functioning scanners made sure to look past the labels and assess actual capabilities. In the bunker-turned-command center, Briggs kept a souvenir from the invasion: a piece of shrapnel from the Verian carrier that Reese had shot down. It sat on his desk, a reminder that sometimes the best defense wasn't the biggest weapon or the smartest strategy. Sometimes it was just a really, really terrible filing system and the willingness to deploy weapons that your own safety board had rejected. He was reviewing the latest defense budget when the long-range sensors pinged. Another ship, approaching from deep space. Briggs pulled up the scan data, noted the unknown configuration, and opened a communication channel. The alien vessel broadcast a standard greeting in several languages, requesting permission to approach for peaceful trade discussions. Briggs checked their scanner profile. They were reading Earth as moderately advanced, non-hostile, open to commerce. He smiled and prepared a response. But first, he attached a file to the transmission. Complete battle footage from the Verian invasion, unedited, with commentary from Duchess the Kinetic Harpoon. The alien ship received the file. Briggs watched on sensors as they slowed, stopped, and then began turning around with what could only be described as haste. Their final transmission was brief. "Thank you for the warning. We will return at a later date. Much later. Possibly never. Good day." Briggs leaned back in his chair, put his feet up on the desk next to his piece of shrapnel, and took a long, satisfied drink of his coffee. "Lieutenant Thora," he called out, "make a note in the log. Another peaceful day on Earth. No invasions, no incidents, no problems whatsoever." Should I mention the ship that just fled? Fled? They were just passing through. Very polite aliens. Sent their regards and everything. Thora grinned. "Yes, sir. Very polite." Outside, the sun was setting over a planet that had accidentally become one of the most feared locations in the known galaxy. Not through military might or technological superiority, but through bureaucratic confusion, rejected prototypes, and the sheer stubborn refusal of humans to be conquered by anyone, especially on a weekday. Somewhere in the Kitten Rescue and Rehabilitation Center, Dr. Caney activated her planet killer for a routine test. It hummed to life, crackling with enough energy to sterilize a continent, while the exterior sign cheerfully advertised adoption hours and volunteer opportunities. The best weapon, Briggs reflected, was the one nobody saw coming. And sometimes, the best filing system was the one that made absolutely no sense to anyone except the people who wrote it.